I will call the St. Paul City Council to order. Roll call.
Prince. Here. Tao. Tolbert. Yang.
Here.
Jalali.
Here.
Naker. Council President Brenmon.
Here.
5 present, 2 absent, being Council Members Tao and Naker, and they both are excused.
Please stand and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance if you're able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again, thank you for your patience. We try to start on time here. There's a lot of moving parts at today's meeting. So folks are aware, the city and county have lifted mask mandates for our buildings. The council is choosing to continue to wear masks just to assure that folks who are here to testify are comfortable. We would encourage you to wear masks. You are not required to. And we do have HEPA filters. You can hear them in the background that make it difficult to hear sometimes. So we'll be trying our best to talk into the mics and encourage you, if you're testifying, to do the same. And we thank you for joining us at the council meeting. It's wonderful to start seeing our room fill up with faces that are here to testify and engage in public discourse. So thank you very much for being here today.
Consent agenda items 3 through 16 are before you for your consideration.
All right. Is there anything on our consent agenda that we should take separately? Looks like there's not. Ms. Jalali moves the balance of the consent agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The consent agenda is adopted.
Mr. Tolbert moves suspension of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The rules are suspended. Resolution 22-421, affirming the extension of declaration of a local emergency issued February 8th, 2022 by Mayor Melvin Carter III.
And I believe we have Director Shute from Emergency Management here to discuss this extension with the council. And he will be testifying by teams. Assuming everything goes well. We are looking for Rick Shute on testifying on teams. Can you hear us in the media room? And Mr. Shute, can you hear us? Yep. Nothing.
He's muted.
Okay.
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. And look, Mr. Shute, you are muted.
Can you hear me now, Council President?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great. Well, Council President, thank you for receiving me, Director of Emergency Management for the City of St. Paul, and allowing me to represent the Mayor's office in his a bit of a staff report here for the extension of the emergency declaration for COVID-19, which he signed March 13th. In short, as we look at the city, there is a state of crisis, and that is squarely on the economic and the financial impact that COVID-19 is continuing to place our residents, businesses, and our employees under. And this extension of that emergency declaration does recognize that. It recognizes that the basis, the safety and health and safety basis for the emergency declaration has waned as the CDC guidelines and their evaluation of the status of St. Paul as our community risk is now evaluated as low. However, when we do look at the economic and financial landscape, as I stated, there still is a crisis that we need to mitigate with this emergency declaration. I would like to point out to the council that, as the pandemic has remained dynamic, especially in this last month, so has the science and the way that the CDC has viewed the city. And it was on 25 February where the CDC changed what was a city, county, and a state of red of high community transmission, or excuse me, of substantial community transmission. And they changed their metric, and we became a city and county of low on that date. That was recognized, and we took action on March 10th. The mayor lifted the mask mandate for city-controlled property. And since then, we've been working as an enterprise within the city across the departments to evaluate those executive orders of the 111 that have been put in place since the pandemic started, which ones are health and safety based, and which ones are economic based, and have recommended to the mayor that there still is a need for some of those measures, those emergency executive orders that focus on the economic recovery portion to be in place, and that allows us some time and space to dialogue which should move into policy, such as a few of them that are now part of Ordinance 22-11 that has not been heard by the council today should be heard and finalized.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Shute? Mr. Tolbert.
So if the council approves this today, Mr. Shute, what things would stay in place?
If the council approves this today, the food halls executive order would remain in place. The third-party platforms, would remain in place. Waiving requirements for certain outdoor uses would remain in place. Allowing inactive business licenses, executive order would remain in place. Skyway hours would remain in place. And license fee reductions for certain license types would remain in place.
Okay, so it's just limited to things that we could also put into ordinance without an emergency order?
As I understand it, Councilmember Tolbert, that is correct.
Okay, and it's all economic based. There's not a public health reason for it?
Correct. The only emergency executive order that had both a public health or a health and safety nexus as well as economic nexus was the Skyways executive order.
Thank you. Are there other questions for Mr. Shute? Ms. Prince.
And this isn't maybe so much as a question, Mr. Shute, as it is a request of the administration. I think there should be a publicly available spreadsheet or matrix that shows the length of the emergency order and the length of each of the length of the declared emergency, and within that, a list of the emergency orders and when they expire. Nothing that I received today when I saw the resolution on today's agenda listed those executive orders that would effectively be discontinued if we didn't act today. We need much, much better information coming from the administration on the administration of the disaster and the executive orders.
Thank you, Councilmember Prince. I will definitely make a note of that and look to improve our publicly available information. I know we do post the executive orders at stpaul.gov, but we're looking to improve the clarity of that publicly available information.
Great. And later today on our agenda, we are codifying 2 of the emergency orders that will be moved forward to be part of our emergency management chapter in our ordinances. So we do recognize that these things ultimately need to be either finalized for into perpetuity or abandoned, and that is work that should be well underway at this point. So I'm looking, is there other discussion? I do have a suggestion on this item, but Mr. Tolbert?
Yeah. What is the plan going forward with this? Would we be looking for another renewal of the emergency order for just economic purposes? With the hope, obviously, with the hope that we don't have another wave like Omicron that comes forward, but would we anticipate another one, or are we going to do exactly what Council President Bredmo was talking about, either codify it or release it?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Tolbert. I know that at least what I'm understanding is the mayor's office wishes to work earnestly to evaluate those that can be extended in perpetuity, i.e. via policy or ordinance. And relative to the environment and the economic environment, although not as dynamic and not as perhaps science-based, we will watch it within the administration, and that will bear on how we approach, So I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I know that the intent of the administration is to work with policymakers, with the council, to identify those that need to continue, and to seek a policy that would be appropriate to do that if they need to continue. And I can see that on my list, the first one of those that would expire would be the Skyways, April 4th. That we'd be looking at, again, working with the businesses that are impacted economically, with the rescinding or with the expiration of the Skyway hours emergency executive order, to identify if that can simply return to its administration through the charter that it previously, or if something needs to continue on that. So it's to continue to evaluate the economic environment and to work on each one of these remaining executive orders to determine whether or not they should be placed into policy or not.
Right. Thank you. And part of that process can also be the council voting on a waiver or an extension or a phase-in. So there are lots of ways to cut that. I see Ms. Yang has a hand up, and then Ms. Jalali.
Thanks, Council President. Well, thanks, Director Shute, for your briefing today. I agree with your statements about us still living in a pandemic, and am supportive of the extension here. I feel that it's really important for us to stay as proactive as possible in protecting our communities and our businesses, and feel that this is the way that we can do it rather than being reactive. And we don't know when exactly, what exactly the future will look like, or when we will have more variants down the road. But this is a really great direction to go into, and so I support the extension.
Ms. Jalali.
Thanks. I'm supportive of extending these. I wanted to appreciate the conversation underway and that my colleagues are bringing up about codifying a lot of these in ordinance. To me, there are certain things in the pandemic, like limiting the fees that these food delivery apps can put on our local businesses and how that's actually harmful. I think we should just take that as a best practices policy and make that an ongoing thing. The sustainable to-go packaging is something that has been delayed a handful of times and is already on our books. And I would love to begin implementing that and making sure that we get more sustainable packaging coming in and out of our businesses, and tap into resources like Ramsey County's disposal and support programs for local businesses that have been in there way before we were in a pandemic. So I just want to echo the desire for codifying the best of what we learned, and I'll be supporting extending these today. Thank you for giving us the update.
Great. So I'm going to make a request for an amendment on this item. It is before us to extend for 34 days, and I would like to recommend 20 days, which gives us 2 weeks and a handful to move forward with these processes. We can always extend again if we want to, but I think that given that there isn't a current public health crisis and that this is economic, and we're looking at ordinances that really should be well on the path to be codified, that I would move a 20-day extension of the declared emergency. It is currently indicates 34. So I would move 20 days on this resolution. Is there any discussion on that motion? All right, seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted as amended.
Let's see. Ms. Jalali moves suspension of the rules. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The rules are suspended. Resolution 22-430, authorizing the police department to partner with the Minnesota National Guard to donate its expired body armor and helmets.
All right, and Assistant Chief Thomaser is on Teams to give us a quick synopsis of this resolution before us. We can see
Council
you.
President Bredmont.
Welcome.
Yeah, Council President Bredmont, council members, thank you. You can hear me okay?
Yep, we can. Welcome.
Awesome, and thank you. And thank you for allowing me to appear remotely today. Last week, the department was made aware through the Department of Public Safety by Commissioner Harrington that the Minnesota National Guard was working with the United States Eastern Command in Europe to do a nationwide collection of expired bulletproof vests and bulletproof helmets that could be collected and shipped to those who are defending Ukraine. The department looked at its inventories, and we have available at least 100 expired vests and about 10 helmets that we could easily hand to the National Guard to be put to use. The equipment is regulated in the United States by the National Institute of Justice, and it has expiration dates as to when it can be used by our guardians in St. Paul. And the equipment would be of little value to the city and the department at this point. And normally we find others to donate this equipment to. In light of the request from Commissioner Harrington, we thought this would be a good cause. The National Guard is asking to move quickly with their collection, which is why we asked for the resolution to be brought in under suspension, and we appreciate you hearing the ask.
Thank you, Assistant Chief. Any comments on this? Obviously, time is of the essence. That's why we brought it in under suspension. I strongly support this, and I will move this item. Any other discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The resolution is adopted. Item 17 is final adoption of ordinance 22-11, amending section 13.06 of the legislative code to establish certain emergency regulations and related to the length of time emergency executive orders remain in effect.
On this item, I mentioned earlier that we are, there's a few of the emergency orders that we are shifting to the emergency management chapter of our code. And we talked earlier about continuing to move forward with other items that have been emergency orders extended during COVID. So this is two of those items, and then a cleanup effort. I think that we're trying to have a balancing act between making sure that the council has a clean understanding of what emergency orders are in front of us and when they expire, but also the challenge of different starting dates and different end dates for each of these items that only extend for 40 days as opposed to 90 as a typical emergency, declared emergency does. So this would expire emergency orders when a declared emergency expires. So they would be concurrent. That means they wouldn't be punctuating our meetings, but on the other hand, it wouldn't bring them in front of us as often. So this is for us for final adoption. Any discussion on this item before we vote? Ms. Yang moves approval. All in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The ordinance is adopted. Item 18 is final adoption of ordinance 22-12, establishing the minimum qualifications for the vacancy of the position of police chief pursuant to the provisions of Section 8.01A of the Administrative Code and Section 12.12.1 of the City Charter.
Okay, now this item is before us for a final reading, but there is, we did have a public hearing last week. We heard quite a bit of feedback on this, the qualifications for the vacancy of the police chief. We have a version 3 in Legistar, and I'm going to look to our Council Director Bryn House to read that to us in a second here. When we change an ordinance on its final reading, we are required to have another public hearing. So we will lay this matter over for next week for a public hearing and final vote. We are not delaying the process of the police chief selection that's concurrently moving forward with us securing a firm for the selection process, and we are also taking applications for the chief selection committee. Earlier this week, I heard we already had 40 interested parties that have registered, and I'm sure between then and now there's been even more, so we're really grateful to see the interest in that role. But I'm going to propose a version. I'm riffing a little bit. I'm watching Ms. House take a look to try to pull up that amendment so we can share it out loud. And I think that the conversation last week was about the somewhat arbitrary number of 500 officers. And so this is an effort to strongly prefer. We chose some different language that I think accommodates some of the things we heard. Ms. House, let it rip.
So the changes to, our Council President and Council members, the changes to the proposed version.
You might need to just get a little closer to your...
Sorry about that. So the change items to the ordinances proposed instead of, so I'll just read the new language. So they would be required to possess at least 4 years of administrative level experience as a chief, assistant chief, deputy chief, or the equivalent rank of a St. Paul police commander, which must include supervision and leadership of sworn law enforcement personnel in a metropolitan area with at least 200,000 residents receiving direct service from that agency. And then the other change is down in the very last paragraph. So must be licensed or obtain licensure as a peace officer in the state of Minnesota within 6 months of employment. Post-license must be maintained during employment.
All right, and we had some just redundant language in there that we removed. So that is version 3. It's been in Legistar, I think. Since
1210.
Since 1210. All right. So I would move version 3, and again, this will trigger a public hearing. We can continue to modify this. We are setting the basic qualifications. This is not what will be in a job posting, nor will it define interview questions or community engagement. Any discussion on version 3? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion prevails.
5 in favor, no one opposed. The amendment is approved, and the item is laid over to March 23rd for another public hearing and then final adoption. Item 19 is first reading of ordinance 22-15, amending section 13.02 of the Administrative Code, establishing duties in the Department of Public Safety and inspections related to rent stabilization.
All right, and we have Melanie McMahon from the mayor's office here to give us an overview. For folks following along, we have ordinance 19, 20, and resolution public hearing 29 that are connected. So we will be moving item 29 up immediately following items 19 and 20, just for cohesiveness, and so you're not stuck here for the rest of the evening, but you're welcome to stay. So welcome, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. Council President and Council members, thank you so much for the opportunity for all of us here to be able to present these 3 items before you today related to the rent stabilization ordinance. As the Council President mentioned, it is an administrative ordinance, a budget resolution, and definitions. These items before you today allow the city to move forward with the implementation of the recently passed rent ordinance by the May 1st date given in the ordinance. These items provide the framework for successful implementation by giving clarity, consistency, and transparency for everybody moving forward. As we're all aware, on November 2nd of last year, the voters of St. Paul approved a rent stabilization ordinance. The substantial amount of work that followed the passage of that ordinance was delineated into 3 different categories: a new construction exemption, a stakeholder group, and immediate implementation needs. For the work related to the new construction exemption, the mayor has proposed and supports such an exemption, and you received that proposal at the end of last month. A 41-person stakeholder group facilitated by the University of Minnesota began meeting last month, and that work is ongoing. They will produce a report that will be presented to you all this summer. The work of that stakeholder group is to examine considerations for improving and enhancing the ordinance in the long term, with any effective dates for any of those proposals being more than a year from when the ordinance passed. So that third body of work related to the immediate implementation is what is before you here today. The 3 items before you provide for that successful implementation of the ordinance on that May 1st date and consist of the following: the administrative ordinance, the budget resolution, and the definitions. The proposed administrative ordinance updates Chapter 13 of our administrative code to give primary authority to our Department of Safety and Inspections to do the work needed to effectively implement the ordinance. The proposed budget resolution funds the needed staff so we can be prepared as a city to handle the work that we anticipate receiving after May 1st. And the proposed definitions provide clarity around the terms of the ordinance and allow for a consistent application of this voter-passed law. And with that, with the administrative ordinance specifically now, I'm going to turn it over to Interim Director Angie Wiese for her presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. There we go.
Director Wiese, we see you.
Great. I hope you can also hear me.
Yep.
Excellent. Good afternoon, Council President, Council members. Thank you for letting me appear virtually here. Before you, you have language to alter Chapter 13, and all departments require administrative ordinances outlining their work. Chapter 13 is dedicated to the Department of Safety and Inspections, and it's being updated here to include administration of the rent stabilization ordinance that was passed with an effective date of May 1st, and that's Chapter 193A. So even though this chapter does give DSI the primary authority, it doesn't mean that we're doing this in a vacuum. Like all work that DSI performs, rent stabilization does require multiple departments for successful implementation. And our main partners in this effort are the Office of Financial Empowerment, Planning and Economic Development, the City Attorney's Office, the Office of Technology and Communications, and City Council. With all of that said, we do expect changes. The stakeholder group, 41-person stakeholder group work is underway, and that it would be highly unlikely that they would do all of that work and not come back with a single change. So we do expect changes. We welcome those changes, and we'll work to implement those when you get the report this summer.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're available, Director Wiese and I, for any questions that council members might have for this first reading.
Okay, great. Let's have you hold on right there. Are there any questions on this item? Ms. Prince.
It's my understanding that with this ordinance, for any staff to be able to implement it, they will need rules of implementation. Are there any draft rules that have been created yet, or what's the timeline for those?
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, we do anticipate that the Department of Safety and Inspections would engage in the rulemaking process, really to provide clarity around a lot of the nuance and the specificity of the details of the process, the how do you apply, where do you apply, a lot of those questions. And with this authority given to them with the administrative ordinance, then moving into rulemaking would likely to occur in April. And the rulemaking process is another opportunity for community to provide feedback. There is an opportunity for the public to review those and provide their thoughts and comments.
And what kind of job skills are we looking for these 3 DSI employees to bring to the work?
For the, sorry, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Prince, I'm going to defer to Director Wiese on that for the staff in DSI, 2.
Thank you. Yes, it's actually 2 FTEs that are designated for the Department of Safety and Inspections. Again, this is our initial take on what it would take to administer the ordinance. The higher level position is responsible for the overall administration, keeping council informed, working with policyholders on what, as they're receiving applications, what changes might need to be made to clarify and community engagement, statistics, all of those types of things. The lower level staff person is intended to process applications. For the exceptions, they're to answer constituent questions. They are to handle all of the appeals with council, more of the day-to-day operations of administering the ordinance.
And have we considered the fact that there are 70,000 rental units in St. Paul and however many number of property owners who may be submitting appeals? And when you say applications, do you mean appeals?
I do not. So those are two different things.
Okay, and what's the application then?
Application would be for an exception.
Okay.
It's outlined in 193A. Appeal would be if the applicant disagrees with the staff determination.
And the staff determination is based on a reasonable return on investment?
Which will all be outlined in the rulemaking process. Yep.
Okay.
And step one, and really what you're or not even approving, but hearing today is, for us, step one. We fully intend to move forward and start with the rulemaking process, but this really gives clarity to the public, to you, to our staff, what we're responsible for, and that's why we're presenting it to you today.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Mr. Tolbert.
Just so we can get it clearly, from a practical standpoint for property owners, landlords, and also tenants, when should they expect to have information to go off of for either applications for reasonable rate of return? Like, what's the timeline when they should start looking for those applications to be out there? I know we've gotten tons of emails that we forwarded on to the rent stabilization email, and I think people just want an answer of like the timeline of when that will be for answers.
Yes, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tolbert, that with this identifying the Department of Safety and Inspections as a primary department and giving them that administrative authority for that implementation, they would then engage in the rulemaking process. I would anticipate that rulemaking process would begin in April.
Okay, so the applications would be in April?
No, I'm sorry, Council President, Council Member, to clarify. May 1st is the date given in the ordinance that we're working towards in terms of accepting applications and beginning the process of the effective date of implementing that ordinance on May 1st. The rulemaking that would identify what that process is and give a lot of clarity around the details and the nuance of that process, that rulemaking would occur in April, and then with that effective date of May 1st.
Okay, so May 1 is for anyone who owns a property or is a renter. May 1's the date where they should check for the applications or check for what those rules would be?
Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tolbert, yes. I'm also going to, again, defer quickly to Director Weezy just to make sure that I am explaining it correctly.
Thank you, Council President, Council members. I would say yes, but that's contingent upon all of this going forward. You have 3 pieces before you today. Like I said, we're proceeding as if they've all been passed, and we really hope that they do, but we need it to allow our work to continue. So the answer is yes, contingent upon us being able to do the work.
Okay, so just to clarify, prior to that, let's assume that this passes council in a timely manner. Prior to that, prior to May 1, the answers that people have been looking for, we won't have those answers, and we won't have an application prior to then. I just want to set expectations so we know how to give information back to people that have been asking for answers since November 3rd, as everyone knows.
Yeah, Council President Brenmo and Councilmember Tolbert, I hope I'm being clear in that. So the rulemaking process in April will let folks know what they need to do to apply for an exception. It will be the proposal of here's where you submit an application. Here's the type of information you need to submit. Here's further clarity around those 7 criteria in the ordinance that go to reasonable rate of return, things like that. And then come May 1st, we hope to be in the position, and that's our goal, right? Obviously, May 1st, that date in the ordinance given, to accept those applications.
Okay.
Good. All right, other questions? Ms. Prince.
I have to say I'm kind of frustrated because back on December 8th, the outline that you gave us at the beginning of the meeting was that we'll be getting a new construction exemption sometime in the first quarter, which we have received. that there would be a stakeholder group appointed, but the work of that group, in that it's going to be released in the summer, will have nothing to do with our implementation process. We were also told, I believe at that time, that our PED director and our OFE director were going to be working on the implementation rules. So the fact that we're not even coming up with the implementation rules until April, and it will be done in DSI instead of by the professionals that we had been led to believe were engaged in that process, is frustrating. And also, I have heard, I've been sitting in on the stakeholder group meetings. There's a tremendous amount of frustration being expressed in those meetings on all sides by people who are not having an opportunity to inform some of these issues, like what a reasonable rate of return is and whether or not the council should pass a new construction ordinance. So I feel like this passed on November 3rd. We heard basically the same thing we're being presented today on December 8th. And then we're getting these requests to create positions and approve definitions and spend real money on something that isn't even going to take place until April. This is just no way to run a program. And the uncertainty that we have put our renters, landlords, developers through is really damaging our city. So I know you're all working hard, but the urgency of what we are going through here is not reflected in the actions of the administration. So I don't blame our staff people. I just feel that at a higher level, this needed to be made a top priority so that we're not down to 3 weeks before implementation coming up with a definition that everybody is hanging on the edge of their seat to get. So and honestly, Ms. McMahon, I know how hard you've worked on this, so this isn't about you. But this is just not the way to run this program.
I feel like it's like a time, I'd just like to make a public service announcement and say that I think it's clear that policymaking by petition initiative is a terrible way to make policy. And this council is a strong, united voice on affordable housing and tenant protections. So we're basically doing this backwards. A policy was decided and done, and now we're trying to put the pieces together, and it is really challenging. And so I encourage folks that are looking at initiatives to bring it to us to do the formal process from the front to the back instead of this opposite direction, because everything from our budget to our staffing to trying to do implementation in an orderly fashion is really upside down and challenging. And I appreciate just kind of the consternation about our overlapping timelines and the confusion, but also just the challenge of having it sort of on us. And just really do not think this is the best way, to make policy that's important in our city. And that's something that sort of beyond the city and brought to us by petition. And so I do appreciate that we're doing, moving forward and recognizing the challenging situation, and also appreciating the frustration around timelines. I saw Ms. Yang with a hand up, and I believe Ms. Jalali.
Thanks, Council President. Melanie and Director Reese, thank you for your presentation today. It's really helpful to know what now until May 1st is going to look like, and I'm really glad to see that there is a solid timeline in place. I have an interest in making sure that we do reach that May 1st goal. We know that this ordinance was crafted by people who are hurting the most in the housing crisis that we live in, which are renters who continue to be displaced today. And I keep them at the center of my heart as I think about why this work is so important for me, being a renter myself as well. And I don't have any questions, but just wanted to reaffirm that I feel the fact that we have several agenda items in front of us related to rent stabilization really is indicative of the work being put into this, and also that we are making big strides in getting to where we want to be. So I have asked for my colleagues that if folks have concerns, really to get those resolved beforehand so that we don't see any delays moving forward in this, knowing how urgent this is.
I appreciate that, Ms. Yang. We got a tight timeline, so thank you. Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. Thank you, Interim Director Weezy and Melanie, for explaining this part of the steps in place. I guess I would like to just speak on why I'm sponsoring these and why we're having this conversation, which is that it's really important that we think of this work in multiple phases. And the phase we're in right now is, with all the information that we have and the totality of funds and knowledge available, what do we need to do to be ready on May 1st? And toward that end, there are multiple bodies of work happening to make sure that we are staffed up, which is the budget item we're about to hear. There's authorizing a department to hold the work, but that department, as Director Weezy herself said, doesn't work in a silo or in a vacuum. And it includes a work group of people who have actually done a fair amount of research and work already on the complexity of creating a standard for a return on investment that has to take into account not only the different market factors for our Twin Cities world that people are navigating in the housing market, but also the criteria that were set forth in the ordinance that was advanced and approved by the voters of our city. So I am personally glad that we are advancing a clarifying ordinance today that gives that definition to what's happening. It continues the work underway. It didn't just begin. There's been a lot of work underway, and it will move it to the next phase. And in addition, we can be ready to start on May 1, and then we're actually going to learn things from there, because that's what happens anytime we do something new. We learn what is working and what isn't. We find ways to have process improvements. And something I've talked with you about, Interim Director Weezy, is in real time, as this team begins to do its work, which is DSI folks, but also there will be other staff that we'll hear about in a moment who are going to help to bring on that added capacity. We will have the chance as council offices to take feedback from renters and landlords in our wards and bring that to you to share. Here's what's happening. Here's communication. How do we problem solve for this? There'll be hourly work happening to problem solve things that we don't even know about, because a whole team of people is doing it. And like we did with the garbage program, when we hired on, after several months of the program in place, an entirely new team of customer service facing staff in Public Works just for that purpose, I fully expect that we'll build on what we start here as a starting point. So to the public who's watching, to reporters covering this issue, to renters and landlords waiting for information, and to our hardworking staff at the city, the message I want to carry is, this is the beginning. We'll learn and we'll keep improving it, and that's my commitment. And I appreciate that what we have here today actually is different from what we heard in December, in that now we have a commitment to staffing. We didn't actually necessarily have that. We had an exploration to it. We have clarification on where the rulemaking will happen, and then we can commence the next stage of the work. So I just want to iterate those points, because I think that's important to keep in mind. And then, with that, if other people have questions or just want to think this over, I'm glad that we'll be moving this to a public hearing so we can keep discussing it. So thank you for the staff report on this item.
Any other discussion before we lay the matter over for public hearing? All right, and just a reminder to folks that we have a 3-reading process. We will hear, today we have our staff report. The next reading will get a public hearing. We have a week off as it's a 5th Wednesday, and we don't meet on 5th Wednesday, so we will reconvene on this item then again on April 7th. 6th, April 6th. Thank you for your presentation on this first item, and we will move on to our next one and lay this matter over.
Item 20 is first reading of ordinance 22-16, amending Chapter 193A of the Legislative Code to define certain terms containing therein and ensure consistency of language used throughout. Welcome, Ms. McMahon.
Thank you, Council President, Council members. Typically, as you're aware, city ordinances have definitions, and especially so for ordinances where the city is involved in an enforcement measures. And so definitions are really needed to provide clarity, so we all know internally what we're referring to, and so the public knows what we're referring to as well. Definitions are included in most ordinances essentially so everyone's on the same page. So, one example is this ordinance refers to local housing, health, and safety codes, but doesn't actually define which codes it's referring to. As a city, obviously, we have many local housing, health, and safety codes. Defining specifically which ones the ordinance is referring to is important. Providing that definition ensures that we're consistent in our application of that term, and it provides that clarity to the public so everybody else understands what we're referring to. So we relied on the technical expertise of the City Attorney's Office for drafting these definitions, and the following principles were used to guide that drafting. Looking at other rent ordinances in different cities, they were simply reviewed for context, for examples, and to see other examples that are out there. Importantly, though, the focus was really on ensuring that the definitions were consistent with the findings in the ordinance that the voters passed in November. The ordinance text itself, as passed by the voters, begins with a section titled Findings that outlines some of the reasoning for the ordinance and what it's trying to address. The City Attorney's Office tried to keep the definitions as close to the intent of the voters who passed the ordinance as outlined in those findings. David Gorski is here from the City Attorney's Office if there are any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. McMahon or Mr. Gorski? All right. It looks like there are no questions at this time, so we'll lay the matter over for 1 week to a public hearing.
Item 29 is Resolution Public Hearing 22-52, amending the city's operating budget to establish a spending and financing budget for the implementation and administration of the city's rent stabilization ordinance in the Department of Safety and Inspections, City Attorney's Office, and City Council.
Welcome, Director McCarthy. It's nice to have you here, and it looks like you're taking the lead on item 29.
Thank you, Council President. Good afternoon, Council members. It's great to be back in the chambers presenting to you after 2.5 years of doing it over Teams. So thank you for reopening. The resolution that you have here in front of you this afternoon establishes a budget to administer the rent stabilization program as approved by the voters. Staff in multiple departments have been working to fully understand the requirements of this ordinance, and we're now putting forward a funding plan to manage the program for the remainder of the year. As has been previously noted by Director Ruizi and others, administration of this ordinance will be a collaborative effort across several departments. And staffing in the City Council will include City Council operations staff to bring on additional folks to manage the appeals and administrative hearing process. DSI staff will be responsible for the overall management and day-to-day operations of the rent stabilization program. And in the City Attorney's Office, we'll add a staff attorney to provide ongoing legal support for the program. This amendment also includes funding for overhead, communications, mailings, translation, and other professional service contracts. All told, this amendment adds about $635,000 of new funding and 5 FTEs to launch and administer the program in 2022. We are now in the process of kicking off the 2023 budget process. As part of that annual process, we will review the ongoing needs to administer the program, and we anticipate a proposal for ongoing funding to come forward as part of that 2023 budget. I'd like to point out that the administration is committed to providing ongoing adequate funding to administer the program as approved by the voters. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have on the budget amendment.
Great, thank you. And I want to point out before we go to questions, just that I'm appreciative of the addition of 2 city council staff members. I know we've talked in the past about the addition of garbage, of water, and of other legislative hearing obligations. And so I'm recognizing the increased work, but also appreciating the opportunity to check back in at the end of this year and make sure that we're properly staffed, and that was the right move, I think is good. But a lot of times we just add to the legislative hearing officer's workload without commensurate staffing. So I appreciate that piece of this, and I wanted to lift that up to my council colleagues as well before we go into questions. Are there questions? Ms. Prince?
Yeah, and Council President Brenmoen, I agree with that. I was really relieved to see that the the need for a legislative hearing officer and support staff as part of the plan. Again, John, and you may have said this is one-time money intended to cover these expenses through the end of this calendar year. And it's one-time money coming from where again? Did you just say that?
Council President Bremon and Councilmember Prince, these are general fund revenues that are coming in above budget from where we budgeted in for 2022. We budgeted fairly conservatively, and typically we would wait till the end of the year to kind of reconcile all of the revenues that come up and down. But when we had this known cost in front of us, we wanted to provide a full funding plan to provide, comfort for you and the council, for the public to know that we're making sure that we have adequate staffing and we have a funding plan locked in now to actually implement this program for the remainder of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions on this item? Ms. Yang.
Thanks. I support this item, and it's really great to see all the different buckets of work under the rent stabilization ordinance all coming together. I have a couple of questions. Can you clarify if these are new hires for every position, and then also if yes, like what's the hiring date or process going to look like too? It can be a lengthy process, so I'm glad that it is coming in front of us at the time that it is.
Council President Bremon, Councilmember Yang, I think I heard you say what the timeline is and if these are all new hires. These are intended to be all new hires. We are working through the timeline as quickly as we can, knowing that there are the normal HR and finance processes that new hires have to go through, but everyone understands that this is kind of top priority, as you've all noted and pointed out today, to make sure that we have a team in place as quickly as possible to be able to keep continuing this crucial work.
Great. I have a follow-up. I wanted to uplift something that I tend to always uplift when it comes to job recruitment of any sort, because we live in a really diverse city especially, and I also represent a part of St. Paul that is a heavy working class community, but also like immigrant refugee community and communities of color as well. So I wanted to share that to me it's really important that we are doing finding ways to be creative and also just working diligently to recruit from our communities of color and immigrant refugee communities. I can imagine there being lots of folks who are out in the community wanting to reach out and learn more about our process, or maybe even submitting applications and may have language barriers. So wanted to stress that to you, and would like for you to share that as well to whoever is going to be in charge of the hiring process.
Absolutely, will do. Thank you for that recommendation and assistance.
Any other thoughts? Mr. Tolbert.
Just one thing it's not a question, it's more of a comment. I know I've told you this, Mr. McCarthy. I've told, I think, near everybody who at some point has worked on this proposal over the last 6 months, so I'm just going to say it on the record. But I continue to think that having conversations with the Ramsey County Assessor's Office to get that level of expertise on reviewing some of these applications will be necessary. If, as we all know, the spreadsheets of a small property owner or a large property owner are very complex, very difficult for the average person to read. Even yesterday, the conversation at the work group, I think, highlighted how difficult it is, and as some property owners went over the things that they look at on their spreadsheets, it's a different language. It's just one that you have to learn, and that Ramsey County Assessor's Office looks at these cash flow charts and things all the time, and it's an expertise that probably will be hard and expensive to hire for. So I'm just going to continue to say I think that's a resource that we should consider looking at, and either getting a contract with them or getting someone with that background, because as we'll find out very soon when these applications start coming in, the financial spreadsheets are difficult for someone just to pick up and read who doesn't have a background on this. So I'll just say that on the record. I know everybody's heard me say that, but I haven't seen it, so I'm going to continue to say it in hopes that it will help.
Great, thank you as well.
Other thoughts? I will just share. I know last November, last December, last January, we talked about this process, and particularly prior to passing the budget, about what budget we were establishing for this important work. And I think we're very, very fortunate that we happen to have this fund and resource that we can use for this. But I do want to say that sometimes a council, I think, can be seen as a frustrating pain in the side when we're asking questions about how we're budgeting, when really I think our goal is to help facilitate the process and make sure that the resources are there when they're needed and looking a little further down the road. So we knew this was coming. I'm going to support this today, but I do want to say that I would have felt much more comfortable if we would have established some amount of money, recognizing this work was going to need to happen before we passed our budget in 2021 for this year. And again, it's not necessarily a comment to answer to, but just recognizing that this council was really was forward-looking and wanted to make sure that those I's were dotted and T's were crossed at the time. I think it's incredibly important that we get this work underway. There's too many open-ended questions, and we need to establish that. I am appreciative that the council's role is acknowledged here, that we have a city attorney's role here, and that we have the work moving ahead with DSI. So I am going to support it, but it is very fortunate, as I said, that we happen to be able to locate these resources that could be spent elsewhere. Ms. Jalali.
Thank you. To just in the spirit of looking forward to, and I appreciate your support and comments, Council President Brunmo, and thinking about going into this upcoming budget cycle, I feel encouraged that we'll have more information than our city has ever had on rent stabilization as compared to last year. We'll have a few months, if not more, of implementation in real time. We'll have a stakeholder work group that has reviewed a lot of critical information about rent stabilization across communities in addition to ours. We'll have the knowledge that our initial team is going to be developing from doing this work, and we'll have the knowledge that our council offices will be undoubtedly continuing to bring forward, as we have been, from the feedback we're getting from the community. So when I think about the next 6 to 8 months of this work, I feel encouraged that we'll continue to learn, we'll find ways to improve. I think the message of today that I'm personally really thrilled about is that we have staff that are committed. I'm glad that we could find these funds. I'm glad that we have dedicated people that are going to help us do this work and lead it, and we'll continue supporting that team. And I would love to build on that over time towards something comparable in other communities if and as we continue to support this policy that the majority of voters in our city have approved. So thank you for your comments, and in advance for your availability if people have questions. I recognize this one is one we are voting on today, but I do await the public hearing and look forward to hearing from our community as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jalali. Your comments especially resonate with the experience we had with the garbage haulers. You know, initially there was a large surge of complaints and questions, confusion, and then when, you know, the water settled and we were able to see where we were headed, I think that it helped that. I do also want to just say that I often hear people say that a majority of voters in St. Paul voted for rent stabilization. It was an off-year election. There's a small voter turnout on those. The voters that turned out did vote for this, and it is what's in front of us, and we are working forward on it. I don't want to mischaracterize it as something that the majority of people in St. Paul were behind. When you vote, when you have a referendum in an off-year election, it's a very small audience, and that is also, I think, a challenge with the initiative that there's a theme here. I'm working on that initiative piece, but I do want to say it is a challenge. But here we are. So there's a motion from Ms. Jalali on this item. Any final discussion? I'm sorry, this is a public hearing. I apologize. This is the public hearing. Is there anyone here in the chambers who is here to speak on this item? All right, we'll go to the phones. Is there anyone on the phone lines? Marvelyn.
Testifiers registered for agenda item 29, resolution public hearing 22-52. The first caller we have is Gabriel, and it looks like you will have 2 minutes to testify. Gabriel, if I can have you press *6 to unmute yourself to begin your testimony, please.
Yes, can you hear me? This is Gabriel. Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yep, we can hear you. Welcome.
Perfect. No, thank you so much. This is my first time speaking at a council meeting, so thank you for having me. I appreciate everyone on this call and in the meeting. I'm a small-time landlord. I have about 30 units on the east side of St. Paul. What I do is, I'm a very responsive landlord. My tenants all have my phone numbers. I created a community garden on a plot next to a fourplex that I bought. Or exactly what our business model is we don't raise rents a lot. We're very responsive to tenants. But when a tenant does move, typically what we do, it's automatic. We'll put $15,000, and that's actually cheap if you talk to a lot of unit renovations. We'll put $15,000 into that unit. When we talk about banking relationships, we actually have to raise rents. I don't know, maybe it's $100, $125, $150, but we have to bring that up to market so that we can, because it really, if you do a $15,000 renovation, right, and you raise it $100, that's not going to be paid over for 10 plus years, right? So the key is to get that money out with a bank. And I'm really concerned when you've got 70,000. I did probably 15 unit renovations last year, right? We're doing a lot of renovations.
Peter, I just want to, I'm going to pause your time here. You said this is the first time you've testified here, and so I want to make sure that you are speaking to the item in front of us and not generally about the rent stabilization initiative. What we're talking about is amending the city's operating budget to establish a budget for implementation and administration of the ordinance by adding 5 staff.
No, and that's kind of what. Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess this is my concern. We've got 70,000 units and rentals, and how long is this process going to take to go in front of the board and get? I'm really worried about the timeline. If it's a 5-month process, 6-month process, it's going to be impossible to do. It's kind of terrifying. So, and I've emailed city council members. I've called phone numbers to try and get some answers around this. But you have to understand, and I haven't heard anything back. And so I'm sorry if I'm rambling a little bit. But I guess that's my big concern. When we're talking about, 5 full-time FTE people, or 2 or whatever. How long is this process going to take? That's my big concern.
All right. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Our next caller is Lisa Moe. Lisa, you'll have 2 minutes to testify. Can I have you press *6 to unmute to begin your testimony, please?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yep, we sure can.
Okay, thank you, Council President. Madam President and members of the council, my name is Lisa Moe. I'm President and CEO of Stewart Companies, a provider of residential, commercial, student, and senior housing since 1970 in St. Paul. We've maintained and continue to build strong presence in St. Paul. Our current portfolio is 1,100 units of market rate senior and affordable housing. There's chaos in our housing market in St. Paul because of this ordinance. Chaos and uncertainty are the enemies of any business, most especially a stable housing market. I want to acknowledge that this rent control ordinance puts the council in a difficult position. Many of you were in opposition to the ordinance, written outside of any public process for the very reasons we are here today. Given the uncertainties, it looks like you're putting the cart before the horse by allocating substantial public funds toward administration and implementation of an unknown set of policies. This budget before you today would create several city positions funded by taxpayer dollars to administer and implement the city's rent control ordinance. You have heard a first reading on a couple of ordinances changes today, which attempt to answer some very fundamental questions about the ordinance, which is intended to accomplish. The 41-member stakeholder group appointed by Mayor Carter is about a month into their meeting process, with the goal of completing their work sometime this summer. Their meetings have been anything but fruitful up to this point, and any expectation of policy breakthrough with this group seems to fray further with each passing of every meeting. They've struggled to complete their agenda items on time, and they are falling behind even with their own agenda they agreed to. And I've listened to these meetings. Setting this budget will do nothing to ease the chaos in our housing market, which is what the council should be working towards. the tight timeliness of a May 1 implementation date, uncertainties of amendments coming forward, and the actual charter language on when amendments can be effected should be the focus of this council before setting forth any public spending money on an unknown and so far chaotic list of policies. Taxpayers, housing providers, and renters deserve no less. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Our next caller is Tram Huang. Tram, you'll have 2 minutes to testify. Can I have you press *6 to unmute yourself to begin your testimony, please?
Hi, everyone. This is Tram. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Council President Brenmoen and council members for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Tram Huang. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Housing Justice Center, a housing policy and legal nonprofit based here in downtown St. Paul. We are grateful for Councilmember Jolly's work to move this resolution forward because it is long overdue. I'm glad we're finally getting started on talking about how and not if. The question of if was decided on November 2nd when more than 60,000 St. Paul voters went to the polls and voted on this issue. These are the same voters who determined you are fit to represent them in office, and now we're waiting for you to fulfill your duty of ensuring that implementation moves forward. Since November 2nd, the organizations that work to engage voters on this policy, including ours, have received questions about how it will work. We've supported and protected renters who have seen retaliatory rent hikes and spent countless hours assisting those who should be getting answers from the city. Of course, we are happy to be here and to support, but we can't do your job anymore. Please pass this budget resolution to begin building the infrastructure and increasing staff capacity for implementation. There's no room for delay. It's been over 4 months since this ordinance has been passed and less than 2 months before it goes into effect. Everyone from renters to property owners needs clarity and certainty on how this policy is going to work, and the clarity will only come from giving city staff the authority and resources to create it. I've heard council members asking questions about implementation and demanding details and being frustrated, but we haven't even dedicated the money or staff capacity for DSI and others to do that. We trust and have faith in DSI and partnering departments to move forward with rulemaking. They just need to be given the authority. Lastly, I heard folks say that policymaking via petition is a bad idea, and that advocates should have come to council with a rent stabilization ordinance. Trust me, nothing more would have made me happy to do that, but I would like to remind everyone that City Council passing a rent stabilization ordinance is actually illegal due to state preemption. So the only way that this ordinance could have passed is via ballot initiative in the state of Minnesota. As much as we would have loved for council to pass a rent stabilization ordinance, the state will not allow you to. Please honor the will of the voters and pass this budget resolution today.
Out of time.
So that staff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tram. Our next caller is B. Rosas. B, you have 2 minutes to testify. Can I have you press *6 to unmute yourself to begin your testimony, please?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep, we can.
Hi, thank you, council members and council president. My name is B. Rosas, and I worked really hard this last November to get voters to turn out for rent stabilization. I'm here to voice my support for this budget resolution to help provide more structure for rent stabilization. The implementation of rent stabilization has just taken a little too long, and I think that the city should have really started on this process a lot sooner. I think that instead of doing that, we've seen that a lot of our council members have unfortunately been questioning the St. Paul voters and the work that they did and questioning their vote. This type of disrespect is now centered in the state Senate, and it's clear that they are naming us a chaos city. It is clear that as a city, we need to get our act together, and we need structure, and we need these processes to get figured out as soon as possible. The residents of St. Paul have been waiting way too long and have gotten silence and disrespect. There are still no tenant protections, and implementation for rent stabilization has now seemed to be stalled. We need clarity, we need city staff, and we need to inform the St. Paul residents of what is going on. We can no longer sit here and let rent hikes continue to happen and our renters be threatened with displacement. This policy needs to be implemented sooner rather than later, and the language must reflect what St. Paul voters voted for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, B. It looks like our last testifier is Vivian. Vivian, you have 2 minutes to testify. Can I have you press *6 to unmute yourself to begin your testimony, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Excellent. So hello, my name is Viviane Hecronia, Isaiah Lead Organizer in St. Paul, and I'm also a resident of Ward 5. So May 1st is less than 2 months away, and crafting a strong implementation process is key. That's why on behalf of Isaiah, I'm here to state that we support the budget resolution and hope that you act swiftly to make sure that there's funding to allow city staff to get started on creating the structure for implementation. I want to thank Councilmember Jalali for taking the lead to create this resolution and to act urgently to instill confidence that everyone from renters to property owners need clarity and certainty on how this policy is going to work. And as a majority renter city, it's incumbent on us that we take this process seriously. So if there are concerns about getting more clarity about how we administer the program and concerns about having a concrete implementation plan and staffing to execute it, then it doesn't really make sense to delay passing this resolution. It actually only exacerbates the uncertainty that some city council members today have expressed. Now's the time to actually get invested resources and staff time into implementation. I totally understand that it's a lot to navigate implementing this policy, and I appreciate your leadership and willingness to lean into uncertainty in this moment. Governing is not always easy, but I really believe that the courage to learn and keep focused on the transformation we seek is what sustains the social justice change we so desperately need. With that said, I ask you to move forward with this budget resolution. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you, Council President Vermeulen and